I declare the meeting open at 6:01. I was just waiting for Councillor Jimmy Murphy, but I realise he's in his chair but with the wrong name tag. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to declare that tonight we meet on the lands of the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and on behalf of the City of Vincent, I pay our respects to Elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the Council briefing, members of the public gallery. This is the meeting at which Council members ask questions of the administration on the reports before us this evening, but it's also an opportunity for public question time, which we will come to shortly. First of all, we do have some apologies, and they are from Councillor Fotakis and Councillor Harley, and we will now go to public question time. So there's no set order. We just ask that you approach the microphone and that you state your name, your address and the item that you wish to speak to. So yes, you're welcome. Please go ahead. Apology, and that is our Director of Corporate Services who is not available this evening. And before, I don't normally make announcements at council briefings, but I think it's very worthy to mention that our Manager of Governance, Tim Evans, is departing the City of Vincent on Friday to make his way over to sunny North Queensland. So I'd just like to say thank you to Tim. He's been in the role for roughly 3 years, and in his time has worked very hard in the areas of governance, accountability and risk management, and has overseen some very big improvements in these areas. I think that his IT skills made the implementation of live web streaming and archiving of our council meetings probably run more smoothly than they might have otherwise. And we also want to thank him for developing protocols around our developer contact register, which was also a big move forward in transparency for the City of Vincent. Tim has also been a really good team member, has developed a strong team in governance, and has always been extremely responsive and helpful whenever he's been called upon. It's been very exciting today to learn that Tim is a star performer in Vocal Evolution, an award-winning barbershop quartet. So good to see the other side of Tim, that it's not just all risk management and that there is some fun and creative stuff happening there too. So big thank you, Tim, from all of us at the City of Vincent. It's been a real pleasure to have you here over the past 3 years, and we wish you all the very best. Okay, we'll now ask questions of administration on items. But before we do that, thank you. Thank you for the prompt declarations of interest. Thank you, CEO.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Council members, we've received a number of disclosures of interest this evening. The first is a disclosure of financial interest from Councillor Jimmy Murphy in relation to agenda item 5.1, the change of use at the Mez Shopping Centre. Councillor Murphy has disclosed a financial interest in this matter on the basis that the owner of the Mez, which is Hawaiian, is a sponsor of the Vic Park Summer Street Party, which is run by Councillor Murphy's event promotion company, Upbeat Events. As a consequence, there may be a perception that Councillor Murphy's interest on the matter is affected. Councillor Murphy is not seeking any approval from Council to participate in the debate or remain in chambers for discussion or vote on the matter next week. The second disclosure I've received is also from Councillor Jimmy Murphy in relation to item 5.6. It's an impartiality interest disclosure. Councillor Murphy has advised that the nature of his interest is that the applicant's representative is Urbanista, Town Planning, which Bianca Sandri is a director of, and Bianca Sandri sits on the Town Team Movement Board, of which Councillor Murphy is the convener. As a consequence, there may be a perception that Councillor Murphy's impartiality on the matter could be affected. Councillor Murphy has declared that he will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly at next week's council meeting. A further impartiality interest disclosure from Councillor Jimmy Murphy in relation to confidential agenda item 12.1, the Rosemountain Hotel. Councillor Murphy's impartiality interest in this matter is that the owner of the Rosemount Hotel car park, FJM Properties, is a founding partner of the Town Team Movement, of which Councillor Murphy is the convener. As a consequence, there may be a perception that Councillor Murphy's impartiality on the matter could be affected. Councillor Murphy has declared he will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly at next week's council meeting. And finally, a disclosure of impartiality interest from Councillor Josh Toppelberg in relation to agenda item 5.6, change of use from shop to small bar. The extent of Councillor Toppelberg's interest in this matter is that the architect for the proposal is a client of Councillor Toppelberg's business, and as a consequence there may be a perception that Councillor Toppelberg's interest in this matter could be affected. Councillor Toppelberg has declared that he will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly at next week's council meeting.
Thank you, CEO. The first item on the agenda this evening is 5.1, number 148 to 158 Scarborough Beach Road, Mount Hawthorn, change of use from office retail to educational establishment. Councillors, questions on this item? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Through the Mayor to Director of Development Services. Was the limit of 25 students provided by the applicant, or was that something from administration? There's a floor plan that outlines some seating for children, and there's an additional 4 seats in there, which might just be spare stools in the corner, but just wanted to check that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I can take that on notice and report back to the notes, please.
And just a follow-up in relation to the limits on the time, operating times that were provided as part of the conditions. What was the rationale for those?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in considering the application, it was understood by staff at the time of drafting the report that the hours contained in recommended condition 1.3 was what was being sought. Obviously, clarification has been provided by the applicant earlier tonight, and that will be resolved through the briefing notes.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, as a follow-on to that question, when you are clarifying that with the applicant, they mentioned that they're seeking to have the hours in line with the opening of the Mez, but only mentioned Monday to Saturday. Could you also clarify whether they're talking about Sunday as well, as the Mez is open for some hours during that time? And a second question in relation to allowing, as was raised by the applicant in the gallery, allowing some children to attend during the day for diagnostic purposes. Is that something that has been considered in the report yet, or can perhaps be included for next week?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it hasn't currently been considered in the report, but will certainly be modified during the week.
Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Acting Director of Development Services. Just in terms of the bike bays, I note that the proposal is that the existing bike racks or bike bays that are located within the Mez would be utilised with this development. And I just was wondering if there's any indication as to what their current capacity is, and if there is, or what bike parking facilities may exist within the public realm surrounding that area.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there's 18 bicycle bays associated with the whole shopping centre, but we'll do some investigations to exactly how many bikes that can accommodate, and can also investigate what bicycle facilities are provided in close proximity to the site.
And just on the, investigations, discussions in relation to opening hours, is there concern or is there a reason that the administration hours have been separated from the student contact hours in the recommendation put forward?
Through you, Mayor Cole, there's no fundamental planning concern with that issue. It was just simply understood at the time is what the applicant was seeking to have approved, and a condition was structured to reflect that. Any extension of the proposal based on the applicant's recent advice, I don't think poses any major concerns, but that will be advised during the week.
Councillors? Director, I'm just trying to understand how the Mez allocates parking. It doesn't appear to be on the basis of specific tenancies. Is it simply just that there's one parking allocation for the centre and then it's available to be used between the different tenancies? Is that how it works?
Through you, Mayor Cole, administration did try to find the original development approval for the site, but was unable to. That said, it's not uncommon for centres of this size to simply attract a generic parking calculation, and that is done as a collective as opposed to each individual tenancy.
So just on the seeking of was that the original development approval or the more recent redevelopment of the centre?
Through you, Mayor Cole, both. The staff tried to find both approvals but have been unable to at this stage obtain them, but we can keep looking.
Okay, well hopefully the redevelopment would be an easier find than the original. Thank you for that, Director. Are there any further questions on this item? Okay, thank you. Because we haven't had any questions on 5.2 or 5.3, I'll come back to those at the end if that's okay. So we'll move to 5.4, as we had a question from a comment from the public gallery. That's number 198 Fitzgerald Street, North Perth. Proposed alterations and additions to existing multiple dwellings. Removal of landscaping to include car bay. Questions? Councillor Gondaszewski.
Just a request that we get from the gallery, we will be receiving advice in relation to compliance with Australian standards. Just if we could request some specific commentary in the briefing notes or update to the report to reflect that, that would be fantastic.
Councillor Hallett.
Can you just confirm that from the report, it sounds like there's 12 bays allocated for the 7 units, not including the visitor bays?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct.
And can you just comment on the public gallery discussion around the vertical garden and what kind of consideration that has for landscaping requirements?
Through you, Mayor Cole, staff, so the Parks team have advised that vertical gardens, whilst they can be contemplated, are not an ideal response given the maintenance difficulties. But in saying that, I can provide some more detail on that through the briefing notes.
Can I just seek further clarification, Director? My understanding was that our landscaping provisions specifically excluded vertical gardens. Perhaps we could just get some clarification.
Through you, Nicole, yes, we can provide that.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just if we can get some clarification also, the adjoining development to the south, my understanding, my recollection is that they received their approval with a west-facing vertical garden as a significant proportion of their landscaping proposed for the front of their building, and that was later replaced with an artistic interpretation of a vertical garden. Can we just get confirmation? My understanding is that during construction it was confirmed by the landscape consultant that it in fact would not survive on that facade, which is directly adjacent to this proposal, but if we can get that confirmed, I think that information is on file.
Director, I just have a question. Is there a car parking surplus currently on site at this development?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, there is. There's a total of 14 bays on site, which is made up of 12 residence bays and 2 visitor bays. So there is an existing 5-bay surplus.
And also, if we could just receive some advice on when the original plans were submitted for the development, did that come forward with the visitor parking behind the gate on the plans?
Through you, Nicole, yes, we can.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 5.5, which is number 266 Lord Street, Perth, additions 2 car stackers to existing motor vehicle, boat or caravan sales. Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Through the Mayor to the Acting Director, can I just check what the current timeline for the current use has been approved for? When does that run out?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that on notice and report back.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Gondaszewski.
Apologies if I've missed it, but were the comments from the Design Review Panel Chair discussed with the applicant in relation to the screening or articulation that might improve the visual impact of the development?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll have to check that and report back.
Councillors. Director, I'm just interested in the noise factor. Is it possible to find out what sort of noise these car stackers of this sort of scale and size would emit? Is that something that, are there sort of industry standards around or technical specifications that would come from a provider that would actually detail the sort of noise that's emitted from these structures?
Through you, Mayor Cole, administration did attempt to obtain some information from the applicant as to the acoustic qualities or performance of the actual facility, but nothing was provided. That said, administration can potentially go to the manufacturer and try and obtain some information throughout the week.
I'll leave that at your discretion because I'm not sure how much work that would be involved there, so I'll take your advice on that. And any further questions in relation to this application? Okay, thank you. Next item is 5.6, number 559 Beaufort Street, Mount Lawley, change of use from shop to small bar. And there is also a question around the title of the report, whether shop to small bar or shop to shop and small bar. That could be the first question.
Through you, Mayor Cole, not strictly. The front 9 square metres of the site will remain as shop, so it is not subject to any change. The only part of the building that is being changed is the rear portion.
Councillor Doppelberg.
Thank you. I've got questions. I've got some comments that I'll make next week. But just in terms of timing and process, my understanding is that if we can just have confirmed that the council approved for the purpose of advertising the change to the policy in relation to car parking on the 18th of October 2016. If we can just get some information as to what happened between then and March 2018 in relation to any reports back to council, so any other appearance of the policy in the public realm, and perhaps internally what discussions were had with the applicant between 18th of October 2016 and their submission of their DA. That would be helpful. I did speak to the acting director yesterday. I'm not sure if the information is available yet, but just requesting some figures in relation to the Barley Street car park. Do we have, which relates to effectively the subsidy that is currently paid by the city for the Barley Street car park? Do we have those numbers on what it costs us and what we draw in revenue?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the query was what is the cost of operating the Barley Street car park effectively. So for the 16-17 financial year, the net cost of running the car park was in the vicinity of $88,000. For the 17-18 financial year, it was in the vicinity of $98,000. And for the 18-19 year ahead, it's budgeted to be a net loss of $65,000.
Thank you. That's only relevant information when you're allowed to make comment to it, but I'll save that for next week. But thank you. And just, I know that the applicant's representative has provided some information around approximations. Can we just get clarity as to exactly the shortfall that would have applied, that the officers have calculated that would have applied if assessed under the previous policy, in terms of the actual number of bays?
Through you, Mayor Cole, under the previous policy, a shop was required to have one bay per 20 square metres. So with a 19 square metre shop, it's basically one bay. And a small bar would have required one space per 5 people to be accommodated by the use. So on the basis of 100 people, 1 per 5 would be 20 bays, plus the one bay for the shop would be 21. But under the old policy, you'll remember that there were effectively deduction factors based on locational qualities. So if this was being considered under the old policy with the current locational factors being applied, the 21 bay requirement would be reduced down to 10 bays, which is a significant difference to the situation we're currently considering. In terms of the existing use of the shop, administration have tried to find the original approval for the site but have been unable to, but doing a calculation based on the 107 square metre floor area of the shop, it is reasonable to say that it would have required 5 bays. Again, with the old policy, including the reduction factors, that obligation would have reduced to about 3 bays. So the net departure of this current application under the old policy would be 7 bays. But that's a fairly long-winded answer, so I will provide that in more detail for the briefing notes.
Okay, and if you can also, and I know that I understand you weren't here at the time, but if you can also just confirm, I think depending on who was the officer at the time, that whether or not the adjustment factors were applied before or after rounding would also vary at times, and sometimes that can make a difference. So if we can just get some of those numbers so that we've got an accurate figure next week, so that if we're talking to it, it's at least we have a firm opinion. And the rest I'll save for next week. Thank you.
Sorry to just jump in, but while we're on parking, there has been, I think the applicant has put forward that they believe the shortfall under the current policy is 17 bays, but I believe administration's view is 18 bays. If you could just clarify that figure, please.
Through you, Michael, yes, we can do that. But as an aside, their staff are of the view that it is, in fact, 18 bays.
So are you saying that it's 18 bays, but you're going to double check it, or that you're confident that it's 18 bays?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm very confident it's 18 bays, but I'll provide some evidence to that effect.
Sorry, Councillor Gondashevsky, go ahead.
I just think this one will be a bit interesting next week, so I'd like to request an alternative is prepared. I don't have a fixed figure on cash in though, but that would need to be part of it. Thanks.
Councillors, I have a few further questions, Director. I just wanted to find out about the proposal which has been relayed to us via email that the applicant would be able to provide some bike racks and stores. So if we could just find out what number and the location, that would be very helpful.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the applicant has proposed 2 bike racks out the front of the tenancy in the public realm. That would provide storage for up to 4 bicycles, but I'll also confirm that through the briefing notes.
Okay, because there was mention of stores, so I'm not sure whether there is actually something different on the table, so that might be worth seeking clarification.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the applicant has a generic storeroom at the rear of the site. There is no indication on the plans as to how many bikes that would necessarily accommodate, but staff can take that up with the applicant and report back to the briefing notes.
And just on the issue of an alternate, I just wanted to go to Part 2 policy provisions of the non-residential development parking requirements. It does talk about where judgment can be exercised to determine the proposal, and it lists a number of factors that can be taken into consideration. My question is that if council were to go to those factors in terms of exercising some discretion over the car parking requirement as is outlined in that policy, would that then trigger the need for the applicant to provide a parking management plan?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the applicant has already provided a parking management plan, but a supportive decision from council may require or may include a condition that requires that parking management plan to be updated.
Okay, so that could just be considered as part of the alternative that's prepared, just to ascertain whether the existing parking management plan would be sufficient, or whether there would be updates, and so that they could be communicated to the applicant and they have an opportunity to provide that in time for next Tuesday night's meeting. Thank you. Any further questions on this item, Councillor Toppelberg?
Thank you. So just some further information that I think would be relevant, or perhaps relevant for next week. Can we get confirmation of any either change or use or new builds on Beaufort Street that have had a car parking shortfall, that have a food and beverage or alcohol-based use in the last, say, 5 years? If I think I'm correct there, but specific, but if we can make sure that the Bow Lane development, what is currently Side Door Barbecue, that I think got approval as a bicycle and juice cafe at the time, and the proposal that recently came to the Development Assessment Panel, which is as yet unbuilt, but the approval that now exists for the rear of the Alexander buildings, which was only a couple of weeks ago. If we can just get details of shortfall, accompanying car parking arrangements, and any cash in lieu that was or wasn't applied to those developments, please.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can provide that.
Councillors, any final questions on this item? Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to item 5.7, number 209 Vincent Street, West Perth. This is a State Administrative Tribunal Section 31 reconsideration proposed for group dwellings. Questions on this item? No questions? Okay, I'll just check my notes to see if I had any. No questions, we'll move on. That brings us to item 5.8, Amendment 1 to Local Planning Policy number 7.1.1, Built Form. Questions? Councillor Loden?
I just wanted to clarify, there's a number of places where there's stars on parts of this and what those stars referred to. So a specific one would be under Environmentally Sustainable Design P 1.8.4, that are capable of achieving one of the environmental performance ratings shown in the table below or their equivalent, and it's got a little star next to it. Oh, sorry, that's not a good example. There was another one. Just 1 second. C 4.10.5.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll look into that and report back to the notes.
Yeah. I might put them into an email to make it a bit easier, actually. I've gotten myself lost in my documents here.
Councillor Gondaszewski, did you have a question? I can go first if you like. I've got many. So I wanted to start with deep soil areas and ask the question about whether we were seeking to bring this into alignment with Design WA draft provisions, and if so, would administration consider either moving that to 12%, which is what Design WA provision is, or could we have a description that would actually say that there would be a combination of deep soil area and planting area, 15%, with a maximum deep soil requirement of 12%? Because I thought that the purpose of this was to sort of move into alignment with Design WA's provisions around deep soil zones. So I thought the terminology and the measurement would be reflective for that component, and then querying that the planting area would just be the additional leftover, rather than trying to sort of present it as has been presented.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, broadly the intention is to bring it into line with draft Design WA, and the 10% deep soil area is provided in lieu of 12% on the basis that C4.10.3 provides a planting area or minimum planting area of 5%. So between those two measures, the 15% can be achieved, but it can be possibly achieved with on-structure planting, which would not otherwise be permitted with simply the deep soil area definition. That said, administration can review that query and put up some alternatives potentially.
Thank you. So I might just flag a possible amendment on that one. In terms of the built form area objectives, I did just want to ask whether there's any thought about whether they're actually specific enough to achieve outcomes rather than just being quite generic across the 5 areas, what is the purpose of those objectives, and are they specifically focused enough on the 5 different areas? Could be maybe something for debate, I don't know, but that was just a question about the sort of generic nature of the objectives under the 5 different areas of the built form policy. I can move on if you like. That might be a tough one to answer.
You're through, Mayor Cole.
Yep.
I'll take that on notice.
Okay, so the other question, which is a bit more straightforward, is I note there is a new proposed requirement for an urban design study to be provided, and that this tends to sort of be around design elements. I'm just wondering, could we get some information on what that would look like and what level of potential work would be involved for applicants in providing that, and what are the outcomes sought in the requirement to provide an urban design study?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll provide a detailed response to the briefing notes, but broadly it would be a capture of the local context and built form character to identify elements of the area that should be included into any new development proposal. But like I said, I'll provide a more thorough explanation to the briefing notes.
Okay, so I guess I'm really interested to know that if an applicant does that, how does that then impact on the design? What is the outcome for the design improvement? If that's the objective, how does that then lead to a better design outcome? In terms of landscaping, it talks about open-air car parks having a 40% canopy, whereas the current requirement is 80%, but I note that there is no change in the ratio of 1 tree to 4 car parking bays. Is that change proposed because the 80% was unachievable on that ratio, or can you just explain the rationale for that proposed change?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, the administration's experience with that provision was that the 80% was extraordinarily difficult to achieve, particularly when the manoeuvring and access components of the car park were incorporated into the calculation. Administration have reviewed that situation and, based on the calculation methodology, considers 40% to be more reasonable.
Okay. Also, just in terms of removal of the not accepted provisions, I just wanted to make sure that there's evidence of capture of those provisions elsewhere, and in particular my questions are about where will landscape plans be captured and required, and the wording, I think in particular around unarticulated monotonous facades and blank walls, where will that be captured if it's no longer a not accepted provision?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can provide an explanation as how that's going to work.
Thank you. And then in terms of achieving better design outcomes through our built form policy, I'm just wondering whether there's been any feedback from the design review panel on that to provide some insights into how that might be captured in any of our provisions in the policy, and also separately whether we've had any feedback from the WA Planning Commission in terms of what we're proposing to change in terms of the deep soil area and landscaping and the lot boundary setback calculations, given those points are in contention with the WA Planning Commission.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of the design review panel, administration have had numerous informal discussions as part of the panel itself through the consideration of specific applications. It is recommended that this draft modified policy be referred to them formally for their comment, and that would be incorporated into a subsequent report to Council. In terms of the dialogue with the Planning Commission, administration has on a number of occasions met with senior department staff, and those department staff did express a willingness to consider a policy setting not too dissimilar to what staff have proposed on this occasion, with the discussion had a particular emphasis on the matters of built form control, design elements, as well as landscaping and those setback changes. So, administration have taken up the discussion with department staff, and there is seemingly a willingness to consider the proposed changes.
It would be good to get some quite specific advice on those two areas, given that we are in a bit of a limbo land on those two provisions in terms of our landscaping and setbacks. So some sort of formal advice from WA Planning Commission on what's proposed would be appreciated if that's possible. And just one other minor thing, I noted that in the under environmental sustainable design, a new requirement had been added that flat roof structures are white. I just wondered if that was considered overly prescriptive and whether light coloured might be a more would potentially achieve the same object without being prescriptive on the colour.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's a reasonable suggestion, and staff will investigate that through the week.
Can I just ask one last question? I just would like to also request a meeting with yourself and Manager of Policy in place just to go through some of these issues in more detail, and I'll invite other council members if you're interested, because I think there's definitely some further discussion that would be helpful. Thank you. Councillor Gontaszewski, I've just got to go to the CEO first, who's just got an announcement.
Through you, Mayor Cole, council members, I've just received a disclosure of proximity interest from Councillor Josh Toppelberg in relation to this particular agenda item 5.8, the amendment to policy 7.1.1. The nature of the interest is that Councillor Toppelberg's family owns a property on William Street that's directly impacted by the proposed changes to the William Street guidelines. Councillor Toppelberg will at next week's council meeting be seeking council's approval to participate in the debate, but not relating to any debate in relation to the William Street guidelines.
Can I ask a question on that? I'm just wondering, given that Councillor Toppelberg has a keen interest in planning matters, would it be worth splitting the two into two separate items, or can it be managed that way?
Just a point of clarification, my interest next week is to seek to participate in debate but not to vote, so I'm happy to discuss anything that's not related to William Street and then depart the chamber at the point of voting, which effectively gives me the chance to have my 2 cents worth anyway.
Okay. It is our major planning policy, so I thought I would ask the question, given it is one of your areas of interest. Councillors, where were we? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Yes, given this is our major planning policy, I just was wondering, in terms of the objectives for the built form areas, whether they were developed following or, with a review of the draft SCP, the relevant objectives of the draft and outcomes of the draft SCP in mind. Has there been any interaction or interplay between this draft strategic community plan and the development of the local area objectives or the built form area objectives in the update to the built form policy?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that on notice and report back for the notes.
Councillors? Okay, I will keep you informed of Councillor.
Got myself straightened out. I didn't. There was 2 sets of the built form policy, which confused the hell out of me. First question was just around P1.8.1, which talks to environmentally sustainable design, and this came up in a recent JDAP meeting around the policy requires building to demonstrate that it can either achieve 5-star Green Star or achieve a life cycle assessment reduction of 50%. Then we were told that this will then be considered at the building stage. What is required of the developer to achieve? What are they required to do by the building code standards at that point of construction? Do they have to meet these standards, or is it a lesser requirement?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll check that and report back for the notes.
My second one was around asbestos and what ability the city would have to put in a requirement to remove any asbestos fencing or asbestos within the building as part of the built form. So if they were knocking over a building and replacing it but still leaving an intact fence, would we be able to require an asbestos fence to be removed as part of the approval?
Through you, Mayor Cole, assuming the fence was a dividing fence, it wouldn't come under the consideration of a development application.
What if it was a rear fence onto a laneway that's owned by the city?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll check that and report back to the notes.
And the last one was, could I request an amendment to 5.14 to change the term new dwellings to new dwellings, additions and alterations, and delete C 5.14.10?
Councillors, Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I'm going to re-ask one of Councillor Loden's questions, but perhaps a bit differently. Just in the advice that's been provided to the JDAP recently is that the policy provision in relation to environmentally sustainable design specifically requires the building to demonstrate the ability to meet those targets, but the advice that has been provided is that there is no, because the policy doesn't call for it, there's no statutory or policy framework by which we can actually require any of those standards to be met. Can we just get clarification that is the case, that basically it becomes a documented assessment of the capability of the development to meet those requirements rather than an as-built? So I guess to ask it as a question, is there anything within the policy currently, or if that is the intent of the policy, can we perhaps get some advice? And now I assume would be the appropriate time, whilst we're advertising, to seek it, but to actually ensure that we get some as-built outcomes that reflect the intent of the clause in the policy.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, staff can review the recent JDAP decisions and provide some advice to the notes.
And just for further clarity, just because I'm a bit confused about it, or I was at the time, but if somebody is seeking discretion on the basis that the building is capable of achieving, say, 5-star green rating, and they prove that it's capable of achieving that, we don't have any statutory or we currently don't have any statutory or policy framework to actually require them to achieve that if they do build their over height, or if that discretion is applied. There is no provision for us to say you can only do it if you build the way that your plans show that you could potentially build. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the current wording of the policy would certainly suggest that, insofar as it's worded, that development must demonstrate its capability as opposed to actually achieve a desired outcome. But staff can review that during the week and provide some clarification in the briefing notes.
Would anyone like an amendment to be prepared for that particular provision?
Would it require WAPC approval in order to require those? Because my guess is it'll actually require a deferral of this and further thought, or it'll have to come subsequently, because I don't think we can do that on the fly and come up with appropriate wording that would... I would guess it needs further thought than just an amendment, but if it is that simple, but if we can maybe have a look at the mismatch between the intent and what the policy actually is capable of delivering, and get some comment on it before next week, and what a potential remedy would be, that would be appreciated.
Councillors? Okay, thank you. We'll go back to the two items that weren't raised in the public gallery this evening that are development services items, and they are numbers 5.2 and 5.3. So first is 1 of 226 Oxford Street, Leederville, change of use from shop to restaurant cafe, unauthorised existing use. Questions? Councillor Hallett.
In the report, this is a pedantic one. In the report it says, in response to the advertising, the city did receive submissions, but I assume it meant to be did not receive any submissions. And then the other question, slightly convoluted. In terms of assessing waiving parking cash in lieu, the applicant raised a number of reasons why there would be sufficient parking related to neighbouring businesses closing prior to the application's evening trading hours, so they weren't competing for parking bays. But I'm just wondering about how do we balance making that policy decision around the current context of those particular uses and those current kind opening hours, when in the future some of those neighbouring businesses might change their use or change their opening hours, and then they might be required to pay cash in lieu, and how do we balance that with sharing that load across businesses within that area?
Through you, Mayor Cole, administration can investigate the relevant approvals for those other sites to confirm whether or not any restrictions were imposed relating to their operating hours, and report back through the notes. But yes, and staff can also provide some commentary on that issue.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
Just a clarification. In the report it says that 2 vehicle bays are provided, but I thought I saw in the applicant's response that 3 bays were provided on site. Just if I could just get some clarification as to, what the number of bays that are directly related to the development are, and then also what the availability is of the other bays that relate to the development. I guess is all the developments on that lot.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that can be confirmed to the notes.
Councillor Toppelberg.
So just, I guess it also relates back to the cash in lieu. So the report indicates that the applicant intends to obtain a liquor licence. Can we confirm whether that licence would be a small bar licence, which is obviously they currently have it, the current use is restaurant cafe, but just in relation to the nature of the licence and how that relates to our current car parking policy and provisions?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the City can certainly investigate as to the nature of the liquor licence that will be applied for, but that said, if the applicant was to apply for a small bar liquor licence, they would need an accompanying approval from Council to run that land use. But that aside, we can check which licence they are seeking to have approved.
Councillors. Director, I do have a couple of questions. With the 25 people permitted, I'm just wondering, is that internal to the eating house or restaurant cafe, or does that include access to the parklet at the front of the business?
Through you, Mayor Cole, based on the applicant's correspondence to administration, it is for the 25 seats within the premises, and that excludes the parklet.
Okay, I am aware that the parklet is immediately adjoining the business, so can we just get some information from the applicant about how many people they would envisage using the parklet when they're open? I think it will depend on when the adjoining business is also open and closed, and that there's some overlap, but there will also be periods when they're open at different times. Also wanted to ask a question. It talks about in the report about the business operating previously as another operator and now this operator since mid-2017. But I am aware that there was a period of closure, which is quite significant. Are you able to provide detail about the period of time since mid-2017 that a business has actually been operating as a restaurant cafe and not during a period of closure?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can investigate that and report back to the notes.
And I also just wanted to, I do have a bit of a, because it talks about the fact that this has been operating, no complaints, etc., and that because it's been open for this period of time, that goes towards the justification of not seeking cash in lieu. What was the question that was coming? I guess I'm interested to know that just because it has been this is a retrospective application, is that a justification for the lack of provision of cash in lieu? And is the car parking management plan that's been submitted sufficient for the waiving of cash in lieu? And the final question is, it's a bit more of a general question, but what role does a real estate or letting agency have in notifying businesses of change of use issues? Because I believe this was advertised as a as a opportunity with an outdoor parklet. So I just think that this issue of it being a retrospective application, I'm not quite sure if the applicant could provide some information about how that actually slipped through. Probably not so much this applicant, but the previous applicant was probably could potentially provide more information and can no longer be asked the question. But I guess it just goes to that broader issue of, does a letting agent or real estate agent have an obligation to provide information about the current use of a tenancy when it's being let?
Through you, Mayor Cole, as you'd appreciate, that's probably slightly beyond the city's role in the process, but that notwithstanding, we can do some investigation as to what their actual obligations are when seeking to let out premises.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Proposed condition 1.4 says that the maximum number of patrons is 25. Can we just clarify if that is including the alfresco? I guess, well, I'll ask it the other way, because I know that when I have asked this question previously, sometimes the answer's been yes, sometimes not. Can we have that clarified either through an advice note or in the condition? And if that is intended to include the alfresco, the plans, which I assume reflect the current operation, show an additional, I think they show 29, because they've got 25 inside and the 4 outside, so it may be at odds with the current operation. So if we can just get clarity as to whether the alfresco policy just applies and they're free to use as long as they're not obstructing, and the self-assessment, or if we are intending to cap it, if that's clarified in the advice notes. And if that is the case, can I ask that that be amended to 29 to reflect the current circumstance, please?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that can be addressed.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. That still does leave the issue of the parklet, which again is a separate area. Yeah. Councillors, any further questions? Okay, thank you. 5.3, number 7, Galway Street, Leederville, proposed extension to the period of approval, proposed alterations and 3-storey addition to a single house. No questions? I had a question in relation to the issue that was raised around privacy in relation to the second floor glazing. It does talk about obscure glazing to 1.6 metres. I'm just wondering, are those glass panels fixed or are they openable? And I'm assuming that the balcony is also screened on the sides as well as the front of the balcony.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, the balcony is screened with a 1600mm high privacy screen. In terms of whether the windows are fixed or openable, I'll report back to the notes.
Thank you. Councillors? Okay, that concludes the development services items for the evening, so I'll go to engineering. 6.1, tender number 550 of 18, pruning of street trees using elevated work platforms. Councillor Loden.
I have a question. It just relates to the assessment criteria, and I was just wondering if there'd been consideration in separating out the financial value of the offer and having that separate from the other qualitative criteria, so that council can make a decision on the basis of the quality criteria and the value for money offered.
It's the twin thing again.
Through you, Michael. Not on this occasion. The simple answer is not on this occasion, but you'll all be aware that the Director of Corporate Services is renewing the guidelines, and that will certainly be an option that we'll be looking at. And I also wait excitedly for those changes as well, because I think that's a valid approach to some of these contracts.
Councillor Loden.
Just want to clarify that when Director of Engineering approved the evaluation criteria, you didn't have the ability to do what Susan was just suggesting at that time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'd also like to raise some questions under the confidential section, if that's possible. Yep.
Yep, no problem. Councillor Toppelberg.
Just seeking some clarity that assume it's the case, but now's probably the right time to ask, but just to ensure that the induction process for any approved tenderer will include some of the mishaps that we've had in Vincent in recent years, to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
A rigorous induction program with staff present on site could be a good option.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. I'm aware of some of the issues we've had in the past, and we're certainly working so that doesn't happen again, and induction's an important part of it.
Councillor Doppelberg? No? Any further questions? Okay, next item is 6.2, Axford Park upgrade, concept design and implementation of quick win works items. Councillor Loden?
The proposed plan refers to planting a bunch of ivy around some of the trees within the site. Did the city consider, given this is a non-native invasive species, an alternative planting for ground cover?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm not aware that we did, but I'll check that if I take it on notice, and I'll put some information out before Council.
Councillors, any further questions on the Axford Park concept? Okay, thank you. We don't have access to report 6.3 at this stage. I understand it will be released on Friday. Okay, thank you, CEO. So we'll move to corporate services. In the absence of our Director of Corporate Services, should we just see who puts their hand up first? Wants to have a go at answering questions? Might fall to the CEO. We'll see. We'll see how we go. The first item is licence to use Axford Park for Mount Hawthorn Hawkers Market Heart-inspired events. Are there any questions on this item? No. Yes, one.
It's just a little one, but I was interested to understand why the city didn't include the electricity use as a cost in the report. I couldn't find it there. I wasn't sure if it was deemed negligible or if it's an oversight.
That is a good question and should be asked.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I have to take that on notice. Sorry, I'm not sure about the electricity payment arrangements passed or proposed for the markets at Axford Park.
Any further questions? Councillor Castle?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I just have a question in relation to the season dates that are proposed. Can we get some clarification as to whether this is the same schedule as previous years, i.e. January is off in both of those years? Or is that a new schedule?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll have to check with the relevant officers who have been working through this proposal with the applicant. My understanding was that the market season is exactly as the applicant is requesting, but we'll certainly be able to provide a comparison to earlier this year and previous years. Yep.
Another good question. Thank you. Any further questions on this one? Okay. So we'll move to 7.2, report from Audit Committee meeting of 17th of July 2018. Are there any questions? Councillor Loden?
Just wanted to check if the Chair of the Audit Committee has any specific obligations related to this item, because I know we had that with the previous one, and if they could clarify what that was exactly.
Yes, you will. At next, on Tuesday night's meeting, this item won't be able to be moved en bloc. We will require it to be moved and seconded, and for you to, you can, refer to the report or wax lyrical. It will be up to you. So, it won't be an en bloc item. Any further questions on the Audit Committee report? Okay. Next item is a late report, investment report as at 30th of July 2018. Is that the one that we've... Questions? No questions? Okay. And 7.4, I haven't got that as part of my late agenda items. So we haven't received that yet. So again, I'm assuming that will be released on Friday. Yep, okay. And finally, for corporate services, we haven't had too many gruelling questions so far, but we still have 7.5 to go, authorisation of expenditure for the period 26th of June 2018 to the 24th of July 2018. Councillor Gonchevsky.
My question relates to dog litter bags and the purchase of dog litter bags for, I think it was 3K or something like that, and just in relation to the trial of alternative, perhaps biodegradable dog litter bags, and whether there's any reports on that, or whether this purchase was for the standard plastics.
Yeah, through email call. I believe that we've made the switch to biodegradable, but if I take the question on notice, I'll check that.
I did actually have someone send me a brand from another area. But if you've already purchased, it probably doesn't matter anymore. But they were called the Oxo-degradable doggy waste bag. Oxo. Yep. Well, it is a bit unfortunate, isn't it? Yep. So, any further questions on expenditure from councillors? Councillor Toppelberg.
Just a question to the CEO. Credit card expenses that are attributed to an officer means that officer has actually made the transaction, or the transaction's been made on that card?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that the transaction's been made on the card. So if I use the example of my credit card is used to book all of the online training for council members where we need to make a payment online. There are some instances where other officer cards might be used for online purposes that particular officer has authorised to be made.
Councillors, I just have one question. It's in relation to the all leasing fees for Beatty Park Leisure Centre, which is on page 776. I just wanted to get an update on where we are at with our leasing fees and changing over to equipment that's purchased by the city.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, as evidenced through this report, there are a number of different leases in place at Beatty Park for a variety of equipment. We did make the decision this year as part of the budget process to continue a lease for some of our strength equipment, and there is a number of different expiry dates for the varying leased equipment at the centre. Certainly happy to give some further advice to those expiry dates over the next few years, but the manager of Beatty Park is working with the manager of finance to extract ourselves from those arrangements as soon as we practically can.
Thank you. Any further questions on expenditure? Well done, team. You made it through without the director. Community engagement, 8.1, Turf Wicket Agreement, Chewett Hill Cricket Club Incorporated. Questions on this one? No? Okay. 8.2, Steve Vincent Art Development Action Plan 2018 to 2020. Any questions? Just be excited to talk about it next week. Writing a speech, Councillor Murphy. Yeah, okay, get cracking. Chief Executive Officer, 9.1 Information Bulletin. Councillor Loden.
Two questions. One, possibly this is through to you, Mayor, about the MRC budget. I was just curious, I noted that with the gate fees, we've seen the increase in the gate fees, but the non-member gate fees have not increased, they've just been increased at CPI. And given the whole strategy around winning back waste and trying to reduce waste volumes, if you had any insights into why that decision was made to actually make it cheaper for someone who's not a member to dispose of waste through the MRC.
Councillor Gonchevsky actually attended the last meeting, but I can answer that question. When it's raised with the CEO, the discussion is around commercial fees being competitive with other offerings, and that if, you know, member councils just pretty much have to suck it up and foot the bill, but non-member commercial entities obviously have the ability to shop around and go elsewhere, and that is pretty much the justification that's normally provided. Councillor Gonczewski, I'm not sure if this issue came up at the last meeting that you attended.
Could we theoretically then exercise our right not to dispose of stuff through the MRC and then dispose of it as a commercial entity at a cheaper rate effectively then?
Under the current arrangements, no. You would have to exit the MRC, which is a long and complicated process requiring assets to be costed and debt against the RRF to be calculated, which would be in the multiple $1 million of value, and then you would be able to be a free agent and could then pay a commercial gate fee, but it probably wouldn't be worth the cost of exiting the RRF contract. So, in short, no.
Then my other question was in relation to the development applications. I note that there was 53 applications lodged and 60 processed, which typically we're processing between 25 and 48 a month. And the maximum lodgement we've ever had over the last year and a bit has been 46. So I was just curious, is this just a bizarre spike up, and are we really, or is this a once-off, or are we expecting to see this increased rate, and are we able to sustain that level of processing as well?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can review those numbers and provide a response back to the briefing notes.
Councillors, any further questions on the info bulletin? Okay, so that leads us to motions on which previous notice have been given. We have 10.1 notice of motion, Councillor Dan Loden, transparency of rates spent in the budget. Any questions on this item? I know that the Director of Corporate Services isn't here, but I just did want to seek some clarification in relation, because there was a meeting between myself, Councillor Loden, the Director, and the Manager of Finance, and we did talk about the ability to actually extrapolate rates from the general municipal fund, and my understanding from the Director was that that was actually very difficult to do, but the administration comments didn't sort of reflect the context that the Director gave us at that meeting.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the qualification I would add to that is that it's difficult but not impossible, and it's an estimate, it's not precise, for the very reason that would have been explained by the Director, because once the rate payments are received, they go into effectively general revenue, and we don't trace the rates dollars as they move through the organisation and are spent. That's why we can provide an approximation of the likely expenditure of the proportionate rate revenue that council receives, but it really is just a proportionate approximation based on the varying kind of 50 to 60% overall income that rates revenue reflects out of the city's total operating income.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Based on that, a question for administration, perhaps for Councillor Loden. Would there be any benefit to providing this kind of graphical breakdown of the income and expenditure of the city as opposed to just for rates because of that reason? We could still indicate what portion of income is rates compared to other income streams, but would that give a fuller picture of how the money that comes into the city is being spent?
There was actually a breakdown of income and expenditure, and it did demonstrate that rates was approximately 58.1%. So when we talked at the meeting, we talked about the fact that of the $100 spent, it would be possible to say of which $58.10 is ratepayers' contribution. But to separate that out, my understanding from the meeting with the director was that that was where the problem, that you could actually make, because the information, I think the link between the $100 and which part of that is ratepayers' dollars, it was in the graph, but it didn't. I think it was that the link between the two was a bit potentially obscure.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to add, the issue then becomes, so as I said, it's not impossible, but it's also, the result is not precise. It's just an approximation, because we'd then have to deduct from the gross expenditure any alternate revenue sources that are specific to those expenditure areas. So when we have tight grant funding, that needs to come off the bottom line, so that cost needs to be excluded. But it is all approximate. And I think for ratepayers who are looking to better understand the likely or approximate proportionate allocation or use of rate funds, then it will provide that graphical estimate.
Councillor Hallett?
Just a question related to the register of reports to be actioned. There was a couple of requests from 2013 that
Councillor Hallett, are you talking about the info bulletin?
Yes.
We're on the NOM. Maybe you can send an email. Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thank you. Just a question in terms of item 1, where it says to provide to council for approval. Is it envisaged that that's meant to come back to council for a formal decision, or is it just that council will be involved in the development process?
So we did discuss this in the meeting earlier in the week. I guess the intent is for it to come back to council so they understand it. The way it's worded is that it would come back and we'd officially approve it, but I'd be quite happy to change it to be such that it was considered as part of the budget process. And so in that note, can I request an amendment to this that says to delete the words to council for approval? So it then says provide a graphical breakdown of how rates are spent in... hang on, I need to think about that.
Provide to a budget workshop?
Yeah, provide to council without for approval. Or something like that. Yeah, because I don't want to create additional administration in this process, just to make sure that we have an opportunity to discuss it.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm happy to have a conversation with Councillor Loden to make sure it properly captures and articulates the intent of that. My interpretation of it, when just looking at the words and prior to having an opportunity to speak with Councillor Loden about it, is I interpreted that to mean in the budget commentary that comes to Council as part of the budget for adoption, that we would include these graphs or pie charts or the like in the budget commentary document, which explains the detail of the budget, so that when through administration and in liaison with the Mayor, the rates brochure is produced, then that can just extract that graphical illustration from the budget commentary that sits at the front of the budget that's ultimately adopted by Council. So my interpretation of it was that the words, for me, were quite adequate and appropriate because Council alone approves the budget, and inherent in that could be that diagram.
Can I just add, though, that on that, my preference would be workshop, because once it's adopted by Council, it's locked in. Like even Len, the CEO, sometimes talks about, I can't change this word because it's been adopted by Council. So my preference would be that it would come to budget workshop. I think that's appropriate. It's a graphical representation which will feature in a budget newsletter. I think it's not needed to come to Council for a decision. I think that it can be dealt with through the budget workshop process. That's my view, but... Any further questions? Okay, that leaves us only one item, which is a confidential item. Well, yes, one confidential item and questions pertaining to an item